Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It means a lot more money. It means you double what you make when you come here.
Will higher beverage container deposit fees get more people to recycle? Also,
my concern is that the decision has erected a constitutional fence around this broken system.
The BC Supreme Court shoots down proposed changes that could have saved ICBC hundreds of millions. And
it was a very long and difficult process.
An historic bill to legally implement the rights of Indigenous people in BC.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. We begin tonight in Coquitlam with new details about the discovery of 2 bodies in a home earlier this week.
Homicide investigators have confirmed to CBC News that one of the dead is a child, either 8 or 9 years old. The bodies were found inside a Seton Avenue home Monday afternoon. The other person was a man in his early 40s. Police say the pair knew each other and that one of them was a victim of homicide, but it's unclear which one. They are also not revealing how the other person died. Investigators say everything happened inside the home and that they are not looking for any suspects.
Meanwhile, IHIT has identified the victim of a shooting at a car wash in downtown Chilliwack. 27-year-old Keith Baldwin was shot just after midnight Tuesday morning near Yale Road and Fletcher Street. He was taken to hospital and put on life support, but later died. Baldwin was known to police, and investigators say his killing appears to be targeted. Anyone with information about his death is asked to contact police or Crime Stoppers.
Skyrocketing property taxes are taking a toll on small businesses renting space throughout Metro Vancouver.
Now, the province and the BC Liberals are both promising to come up with a solution. But as our John Hernandez reports, many business owners aren't holding their breath.
The wheels keep spinning at Malkin's Cleaners in West Vancouver, but over 30 years, the business has changed.
People are far more casual now. You certainly see less formal clothing. Of course, without smoking in bars, you no longer have clothes covered in cigarette smoke.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
One of the hardest adjustments he's had to make along the way, keeping up with soaring property taxes.
So we're paying an additional, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's an extra $6,000 or $7,000 compared to previous year. So it's quite a lot.
Like many areas in Metro Vancouver, the Ambleside neighborhood is in the midst of being redeveloped. With new condos like this one going up, the value of older properties like these go up too.
Every building goes up in West Van, it adds to the tax.
A few doors down, longtime Lebanese barber Michel Ibrahim also feels the financial pressure.
Property tax has always been an issue for the new development in West Van. As a small business owner, it affects us because our tax always has to be paid through our rent. It doesn't come down, it always goes up.
It's a harsh reality that's forced many businesses in the region to shut down, but relief could be on the way.
It has really become a dramatically bigger issue rapidly over the last couple of years.
Yesterday, the BC Liberals introduced a bill that would give municipalities the option to lower property tax rates for small businesses like these. Municipal Affairs Minister Selena Robinson stopped short of supporting the legislation, but said the province is working on its own solution to the problem by next year.
We've identified some long-term solutions that require more work to make sure that they deliver in the way that they need to deliver, but we're also looking at interim solutions.
Details of that plan are scarce, and for some shops, the clock is ticking. But Ibrahim won't hold his breath.
To hope is one thing, and to something to be done is another thing. 28 years, I've never seen it comes down. Always comes up.
Regardless, he knows more condos also means more customers. John Hernandez, CBC News, West Vancouver.
Well, get ready to pay more when you buy non-alcoholic drinks at the store.
CBC's Rafferty Baker tells us tonight deposits on cans and bottles up to 1 liter in size are doubling, going from 5 cents to 10 at the start of November.
Wish it was November 1st already.
Spinners who earn a living collecting bottles and cans in BC will have to wait a few more days, but they're looking forward to a pretty major raise.
I had a whole load of pop cans today and made $14. That would have been 28 bucks. So that's going to be an awesome thing.
They'll see a real increase in their funds. For us, it's really a wash. We're just going to be giving out more money and getting the same amount back.
Smith says the deposit increase is great, but it would be even better if deposits were added to milk cartons, as they are in Alberta. United We Can gets a lot, and it's an added cost to recycle them. Return It, which runs the container recycling program in the province, says they hope the increase will keep more containers out of landfills. And that could just be the case when they're twice as valuable.
I think anything that the government does to help recycling is a step in the right direction.
I'm actually from Oregon, and that's what our return rate is. And that was also recently bumped up. And that's just going to incentivize more people to take care of their own recycling and get a return on what they spend.
We get a lot of homeless people collecting them. Definitely, they're going to be ever more enthusiastic.
Return It says the deposit increase will affect 80% of the drink containers in its system. And of course, if you're not someone who brings back your own containers, that'll mean next week those cans or bottles will cost you double at the cash register.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Vancouver.
It wasn't easy. In fact, it took 10 years to come to an agreement on one letter in an historic United Nations document.
Now, that Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is on its way to being formally adopted in BC.
As Tanya Fletcher reports, it's hoped the first of its kind bill in Canada will lead to better First Nations and government relations.
A historic day marked by rare sights and sounds inside the House.
I am proud that BC is a leader in Canada in advancing reconciliation together with Indigenous peoples. Let's make history.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Jody Wilson-Raybould stood inside the packed chamber alongside several First Nations leaders, many visibly moved as Bill 41 was tabled.
What an amazing day today is. We are standing here with the dignity of our people intact.
It's a day that's been a long time coming for Grand Chief Ed John. He traveled to Geneva in the 90s to help craft the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
We spent close to 10 years arguing about one letter on one word. That letter was the letter S and the word people. The characterization as Indigenous peoples was important to us.
His work helped lay the foundation for federal UNDRIP legislation here in Canada. It was passed in the House of Commons a year and a half ago, but eventually stalled and died in the Senate. Still, he's hopeful the newly elected Liberal minority government will make sure it gets through this time.
With the support from the New Democrats and the Green Party and the Independent, they all strongly support this initiative.
As for BC's legislation, Premier John Horgan says they can start working on an action plan once the bill receives royal assent.
Ministries across government will be working on the action plan, and we started, as we already have, with the environmental assessment process, with Children and Family Services, and then we'll build off of that ministry by ministry, law by law, sometimes clusters if there's commonality between those laws, and that's the objective here.
There's no timeline yet for that action plan, but Indigenous leaders say patience is needed.
We'll get there when we get there, but at least we have a vehicle, at least we have a framework that will guide these important discussions.
Important decisions towards reconciliation that'll take a long time yet, perhaps generations. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Victoria.
Well, Vancouver City Council has approved a new plan to deal with the tent city in Oppenheimer Park in the downtown east side. The city aims to help connect homeless tent city residents with housing, healthcare, and support services. But the city is also to work with the park board to provide access to showers, washrooms, and a community kitchen in city parks. Last month, the park board voted against evicting people living in the tents, choosing instead to help them find alternative housing. The city will be seeking more provincial and federal funding to provide employment. It has already spent more than $1 million dealing with the issues in the tent city.
BC businessman and former CFLer David Sidhu is facing new charges in the college admissions scandal. Sidhu was already charged with fraud in March after he paid $200,000 to have someone take college entrance exams for his two sons. The new charges allege he conspired to cheat law and business exams for the same sons. Sidhu is one of several celebrity and wealthy parents accused of participating in the scam. New charges were brought against several of them this week. Sidhu is out on $1.5 million U.S. bail and has pleaded not guilty to the charges.
It's a big blow to the NDP's plan to try to put out the ICBC financial dumpster fire.
The BC Supreme Court has shot down changes that were designed to save the Crown Corporation hundreds of millions of dollars.
CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burritt joins us live with more. Dan, what has the court ruled?
A judge has scrapped the rule to limit expert witnesses in car crash injury claims. This was meant to save cash-strapped ICBC $400 million a year. People involved in injury claims could only use one expert report for fast-track claims and up to 3 experts and reports for all others. But a judge now says that rule restricts the court's ability to decide a case fairly on the evidence that's presented, and that is unconstitutional. David Eby says he's struggling with that part of the ruling.
It is especially challenging knowing the problem that we face in our justice system with a bloated and excessive adversarial expert system that costs literally tens of thousands of dollars for plaintiffs and defense to deal with.
Eby hasn't said if the province will appeal this ruling or bring in new legislation.
Dan, what do lawyers who deal in car crash claims think about all of this?
Well, the Trial Lawyers Association is pleased, Anita. They say the rule imposed arbitrary limits on cases, and now they can be judged on their merits. Still, they're open to some cooperation.
We would be prepared to work with Minister Eby to try and deal with this issue to the extent that it is a problem and work on containing costs in other ways that don't hurt our clients.
Keep this in mind. The province recently dropped its projected budget surplus to $179 million. A $400 million hit to the bottom line would mean BC is back in the red. Anita, Mike?
Dan Burritt, live for us tonight. Thank you.
Well, Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg has arrived in Vancouver ahead of tomorrow's climate strike protest.
The 16-year-old tweeting a photo of herself on the seawall this afternoon. She'll take part in a climate strike outside the Vancouver Art Gallery tomorrow. The teen has become the face of a worldwide movement of young people demanding world leaders do more to fight climate change.
And Brett Soderholm joins us now with our first look at the forecast. So what can Greta and the other protesters expect tomorrow?
Well, it is not going to be the best day, unfortunately, for them. There is going to be a lot of wind to be dealing with, and in addition to that, we are looking at a decent amount of rain coming through first thing in the morning. Now, depending on when people start to be gathering, the rain might have actually finished, but certainly the wind is going to be the #1 story of the day. Currently, temperatures actually a little bit above seasonal, looking at widespread 12 and 13 degrees, mostly across the region right now. But throughout the overnight period, well, as it naturally does, things are going to be cooling down, but we are going to be seeing a very significant change up into our weather pattern. For the overnight period, just a few clouds are going to be expected. There is the chance for a few showers, but really, 8 o'clock in the morning, I found a very specific icon that's trying to emphasize how windy and rainy it's going to be simultaneously. We could be seeing some gusts here in Vancouver proper at about 70 kilometers an hour. By the afternoon, however, things are going to be clearing up quite nicely. The sun's going to come back, and by tomorrow overnight, well, it's going to be clear skies from then on in. I wanted to really emphasize we've got a special weather statement in effect right now for Metro Vancouver. Because of these winds, we really could be seeing them up to about 80 kilometers an hour, especially if you're right close to the Strait of Georgia. And I'm going to emphasize this a bit when I come back, but we are going to be looking at some strong winds shifting from the south to the northwest as the day goes on tomorrow. So stay tuned.
All right, I think we get it, Brett. It's going to be windy tomorrow.
You got that right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we'll see if those winds have any effect on BC Ferries sailings tomorrow. But today, BC Ferries started offering beer and wine along with its Pacific buffet. Don't expect your ferry to turn into Party Central. There are plenty of rules. Cheers. Happy voyage. Thank you. You can have 1 glass of wine or beer along with a meal on 3 ships that serve the buffet from 11 a.m. onwards. All the alcohol is local, and there are 2 choices each of red or white wine. Only those 19 and over, of course, can be served, and there will be carding. No drinks will be served within 30 minutes of docking. It's all part of a 1-year pilot project.
Party on BC Ferries. All right, a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem. The free app is also where you can find other CBC programs.
And CBC Vancouver also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Well, it affects 500,000 Canadians. After the break, why patients with chronic fatigue syndrome say their suffering is being ignored.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight during the 3-minute commercial break on CBC TV. After a 1-week break, we are back with Throwback Thursday.
Yes, and tonight we're taking you back 27 years for a dance craze that was sweeping the nation at the time. Former CBC reporter Deborah Collins took a look.
Achy breaky dance fever is sweeping North America. It's not enough just to hum the tune anymore. Now you gotta know the moves.
Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, stop. Now you're pop, pop, pop. Wheel, 2, 3, 4. Back, up, down, back.
And what better place to learn them than a professional dance studio? At the Judy Neese School of Dance, Achy Breaky has arrived. Neese spent the summer learning country dances in the southern states. They're all the craze in the U.S. and in Western Canada, led at the moment by the infectious Achy Breaky.
Everybody, even the children coming to the dance classes, everybody wants to learn how to do the achy breaky. So I'm teaching the achy breaky to everybody. Achy breaky hours.
We've seen it on TV on the Nashville channel, and it looks really fun. So, of course, we wanted to learn it.
So we go side, behind, side. There's 3 counts, 1, 2, 3.
And to do it right, you learn one move at a time, over and over and over.
Now we do that again.
But this is one of Nee's more advanced classes, and they get the hang of it pretty quickly. Well, almost. It's kind of hard to believe, but you're actually looking at a bunch of ballroom dancers. And it's even more of a departure for some. Evgeny Tretyakov is originally from Russia. He sees the achy breaky as a rare and exotic way to break loose. So how about this achy breaky dance? Have you ever heard anything like this before? Seen anything?
Not in Russia. You know, Russians are wild dancers, but they dance different kind of dances. It's something very exotic for me, like Wild West, a stereotype which is very big in Russia.
So you feel like you're in the Wild West here? The achy breaky's not the first dance craze to hit the Western world, and it won't be the last. Just how long this line dance goes on is anyone's guess. But one thing's for sure, a broken heart has never been so much fun.
I was trying to get up and dance, but Mike said it wouldn't be appropriate. I cannot do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I could learn pretty quickly there.
Well, it looks pretty simple.
Can you do it?
No, isn't it like it's like 2-step and then a side step? It's kind of like
2-step instead of side. That's really telling us a lot, Mike.
I don't know. There's achy breaky, then the Macarena, then maybe flossing now, something like that.
I think there were a few in between, but yeah.
We're back in just a sec with more national headlines. Well, it is a bit quieter in Ottawa after the exhaustion of an election campaign.
But for Catherine McKenna, that's not the case. A vicious slur was painted across her face at her constituency office. She was environment minister in the last government. We're partially blurring it, but the message is very clear. Salima Shivji has McKenna's reaction.
Just days after defending her seat, Catherine McKenna was hoping to spend some downtime with her kids. Until this.
We've just been through a really divisive campaign with a lot of negative rhetoric. And this is really beneath us as Canadians. I'm angry and quite frankly really disappointed. Anyway, I am a bit shaken. Look, I'm tough, but I'm really sick of this.
Sick of being a target over and over again. Attacks from across the aisle, the Climate Barbie nickname weaponized.
I want this to be the end of it.
It wasn't. After 4 years as environment minister, one of the longest runs ever in what has become a high-profile and divisive portfolio, there were so many threats McKenna had to get extra security. Plainclothes officers in the background as she campaigned. Today she received support from across the political spectrum. A call for respect from a conservative premier who's railed against the federal carbon tax. Doug Ford called the graffiti disgusting. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh used the words absolutely disgraceful and said women in politics should not have to deal with such attacks. There was also solidarity from other female politicians.
I hate the brazenness of doing it on the front of your office window. I mean, it's such a public thing to do, and it's shameful for somebody to think that that's acceptable in this day and age.
McKenna has filed a complaint with police, and she's more determined than ever.
It's not going to chase me out of politics, just going to make me recommit.
Even so, she has a simple plea, a call for politics to be better. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Ottawa.
Green Party leader Elizabeth May has laid out her party's terms for supporting Justin Trudeau's minority Liberal government. One thing she's highlighting is the need for electoral reform.
But let's face it, we have a voting system that gives parties that are divisive and separatist a better shot at electing seats than parties that are national, across the country, with strength everywhere.
Other terms: climate change targets, universal pharmacare, and Indigenous rights. The Green Party secured 3 seats in Monday's election, gaining a new seat in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and almost doubling its popular vote from the last election.
It's a debilitating disorder that affects more than 500,000 Canadians. Yet patients living with chronic fatigue syndrome say their suffering has been ignored for decades.
But now, as health reporter Vicadopia explains, research on diagnosing and ultimately treating the disease is finally underway in Canada.
Rest your arm.
Researchers are trying to find out why Marie-Josée Ménard is sick. Routine medical tests suggest she's fine, but she's not.
Awful. Awful. There were days I could barely get my arms up to drive.
The Montreal mom and teacher suddenly started feeling this way a decade ago. It took years before she was finally diagnosed with ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. At first, the crushing fatigue and near paralysis was diagnosed as depression. That's common for people with ME.
It was in my head. People around me were just telling me, you know, just get on with it. Oh, you're just tired. Everybody gets tired.
Chronic fatigue syndrome, or myalgic encephalomyelitis, was first identified in the 1980s. The prescribed treatment at the time was psychotherapy and exercise. It's an approach that has been long discredited, yet the idea that it is somehow a psychological illness persists, setting back research and recognition. Alain Moreau leads a network of ME researchers, created only recently after getting a research grant from the same federal agency which actually rejected his application a few years back after saying ME was not a disease, even though it's recognized by the World Health Organization and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. Moreau relies on 200 patient volunteers for his research. Some can barely move.
85% of the patients that we are testing are unique individuals that are so severely affected they are housebound, which means that we need to send clinical research nurses at home to do the testing.
To test the T. Researchers are studying certain stress responses in the blood cells and spinal fluid of ME patients. Ron Davis is a pioneer in DNA sequencing. The Stanford professor is now focused on helping ME patients like his son. With a new test that's already accurately identified the blood samples of a small group of ME patients. Davis says developing a reliable test is critical because ME is still diagnosed based only on physical symptoms.
I've seen so many doctors say, well, if you don't have a diagnostic molecular test, then I don't believe the disease exists.
For Marie-Josée Ménard, volunteering for these tests takes a toll. But the hardest part is the price paid by her children.
Not being able to be there for them.
But she says she'll keep doing the tests if it helps lead to a treatment. Vicadopia, CBC News, Montreal.
More than a third of Canadian students say they've been physically assaulted before grade 9. After the break, why violence in schools isn't going away.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I had a whole load of pop cans today and made $14. That would have been 28 bucks. So that's going to be an awesome thing.
Deposits for non-alcohol beverage containers are doubling. That means you'll pay 5 cents more at the store. The hope is the change will provide a bigger incentive for you to recycle.
We'll have to look at all of our options. It's obviously a challenging decision for us in our reform efforts here.
The BC Supreme Court has overturned new rules at ICBC that could have saved the Crown Corporation $400 million. A judge scrapped the rule that limits expert witnesses in car crash injury claims.
This will help us move to that next level without having to go to court.
BC has tabled an historic Indigenous rights bill. The legislation is meant to provide a framework for the province to align its laws with the standards of the United Nations Declaration of Rights on Indigenous Peoples.
More than a third of Canadian students say they've been physically assaulted before grade 9. Just one startling fact uncovered in a groundbreaking investigation by CBC News.
Our team spent months studying violence in schools and spoke to 4,000 young people across the country.
David Common now on what many of them are living through.
The attack 2 weeks ago on the grounds of a Hamilton school was perhaps the most egregious example of violence in schools. More than a third of students we surveyed say they were slapped, punched, kicked, or bitten at least once in elementary or middle school by another student. Slightly more reported the same thing in high school. Nearly 1 in 5 were threatened with a weapon. While boys reported more physical violence affecting them at school from another student, when it came to sexual incidents, it was overwhelmingly girls. More than 1 in 4 girls surveyed say unwanted sexual rumors or messages are shared about them. 1 in 4 say they've experienced unwanted sexual touching by another student in school. More than half of student surveys say it first happened between grade 7 and 10. And many keep quiet about it, even though the incidents happened in school. 2/3 did not report to teachers or principals.
So the person who's been touched in an unwanted way then has to pretend everything's okay. So then the person who has touched them inappropriately in a sexual way doesn't get the message that this is wrong.
Thousands of students across the country have given us a good sense of what they're experiencing, and you can find details specific to your region on our website, cbcnews.ca. David Common, CBC News, Toronto.
And tonight on The National, find out more of what we learned when we surveyed 4,000 young people about their experiences with peer-on-peer violence in our special series, School Violence. Watch more on Marketplace this Friday at 8 p.m. on CBC TV and on GEM. And if you have a question or a story for us about school violence, you can email us at schoolviolence@cbc.ca.
So we've been looking at violence between students, but what happens to students when they are victims of verbal abuse or other inappropriate behavior by a teacher?
On Prince Edward Island, former students are speaking out. A music teacher was recently found guilty of sexually touching 3 students in his band class.
Now, as Sally Pitt explains, other students allege he behaved inappropriately with them over the past 3 decades. And a warning, there is strong language in this report.
If you're on the same level with that stuff as high school kids, that's a red flag.
Yeah. Vanessa Rice and Maria Campbell took band 15 years apart, but they have a lot in common, most notably their vivid memories of their band teacher, Roger Jabbour.
I obviously didn't have any other teachers who were crying to me on a regular basis or requesting hugs while crying in his office alone with the door closed.
And or people were like messing up a note or the band just like couldn't catch on or something, we're having an off day, he'd be like, oh, like you all have shit for brains, and it was just a thing, like it was a running thing.
Now they and other former students are telling their stories about hugs, hand-holding, and Jabbour's crying spells, and also about angry outbursts, swearing, and sexual comments, allegations spanning 3 decades.
He would request that students hug him and would get emotional and upset if he refused to do so.
And he asked me if I was deaf, dumb, blind, or stupid in front of the band.
Over his 46-year career, Roger Jabbour was known as an award-winning and dedicated band teacher, highly respected in the music community. He himself estimates he taught 4,000 students over his career. A shining reputation tarnished last year, though, after his conviction for sexually touching 3 female students. They testified about being kissed, pushed against the wall, pulled onto Jabour's lap, and given full-body hugs. During his trial, Jabbour testified he did hug students regularly as greetings and to offer comfort, but he denied doing anything unprofessional or getting angry with students. Jabbour had no comment on these latest allegations. Some students tell CBC they thought they just had to put up with his behavior.
I don't think a lot of teenagers have a really good idea of that line, especially because, like, in high school, your teachers do kind of open up this new way that they act with you.
Everyone in the community knew about this kind of behavior, so I didn't feel there was anything to tell.
Some complaints were made over the years, but students say nothing seemed to change.
This behavior went on for so many years. Maybe they talked to him, maybe he had warnings, we don't know, but clearly it didn't stop.
Now those former students and others are calling for a review to find out why it didn't stop.
It'd be nice if it was made public and that the school system came forward and said, well, we learned from this. This was a bad thing that happened for 30 years. We don't want that happening again. I think that would send a huge message to students that they're important.
Right now, Ontario, BC, and Saskatchewan are the only provinces to post teacher discipline online. It's not clear whether Jabbour was ever disciplined. CBC has asked for those records, but has been refused. The department says it's taking some additional steps to ensure schools are safe places, but gave no indication as to whether it would hold a formal review of the long-time Jabbour allegations. Sally Pitt, CBC News, Charlottetown.
25 to 7, a live look at, well, that's the old post office, just kitty corner to our studios here at Georgia and Hamilton. There's going to be a grocery store moving in, along with Amazon and other establishments, as soon as they finish. A mainly cloudy day today, but showers are heading our way. Brett's going to tell us when to expect them next.
Well, now Brett Soderholm is everybody's favorite weatherman, meteorologist.
Why?
Because he has good news in store for us.
I do.
I mean, he is my favorite.
Yeah, if we skip
I'm
through
saying
the
now
next
he's the
24
favorite.
hours, I think afterwards you're going to love me. You might not like me for the next little bit, but you're just going to have to get through. We know we joke we have the calm before the storm. Well, this is the storm before the calm, as it were. But this morning, if you wanted to see what it was looking like, I don't think it was particularly calm nor stormy. It was kind of just in the middle. A lot of those clouds building. This was that transition into the more unsettled weather that we are expecting to be coming in effect for essentially the overnight period tonight throughout tomorrow morning. But then as soon as we get through all of that, the good news is the sun is coming back and it will be around for a good while. It's not just going to be a short little visit. Earlier, I was emphasizing definitely how windy it is going to be. It's not just in the metro region. Anywhere that you're seeing here in gray is under a special weather statement right now. So that is in for portions of the interior, both the north and the south, as well as the Thompson and some of the Chilcotin and Caribou regions. We've got wind gusts there potentially of up to 80 kilometers an hour. And in fact, if you go toward Williams Lake, well, there it could even be reaching 90 kilometers an hour. If that's not enough, well, if you go up toward the Peace region, well, there's snowfall expected there. We're looking at potentially 15 centimeters of it accumulating anywhere south of Dawson Creek. Dawson Creek in itself is going to get about 5. And meanwhile, closer to the coast, we're looking at about 50 to 70 millimeters of rain for places like Bella Coola. Now, the reason I'm showing you all of that is because this is the most weather that British Columbia as a province is going to be experiencing for really the next foreseeable future. And this is all thanks to the very same system that's going to be making its way across the province. Wanted to show you what that's going to be looking like for us as it pertains to the rainfall that is going to be expected throughout the overnight period and into tomorrow morning. What you're going to see here very early on in the morning tomorrow is 6 o'clock probably at the earliest, 7 till 8 o'clock. That's when a quick but very heavy band of rain is going to be coming through. Those winds as well going to be worth mentioning. But by the afternoon, those clouds are going to dissipate. The winds are still going to be there, so definitely hold on to that. But we are looking at clear skies coming in afterwards. And really, clear skies, well, that gets to be the theme all the way into next week. You're going to see that there is really nothing going on aside from maybe a little bit of snow over to the Rocky Mountains, but nothing down toward our coast range or anything closer to home. So it's a lot of fun when I get to show you a 5-day that is looking like this. Hopefully this is going to win me a little bit of favoritism here because Friday, not necessarily the best day, but a full sunny weekend is ahead, lots of confidence, and that trend continuing right into next week, though keep in mind, going to be a little bit chilly on those overnights.
Looks great. Thank you, Brett.
You're welcome.
The bodies found in a truck container in the UK identified as Chinese nationals. Coming up, why truck smuggling is getting worse.
I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. Get your tickets to the Chutzpah Festival today. Catch culturally diverse performances in comedy, music, theater, and dance at this one-of-a-kind festival. And join CBC Vancouver's Mike Killeen on November 5th as he hosts this year's Power 50. He'll reveal this year's movers and shakers according to Vancouver Magazine. For more on these events, check us out online.
Police in Britain are continuing to question a driver in connection with the deaths of 39 people. Their bodies were discovered in a refrigerated truck east of London yesterday.
Authorities have also raided 3 sites in Northern Ireland where the driver is from. And as Renee Filipponi reports, the incident has reignited conversation about the long-standing problem of human trafficking in Britain.
Police are confirming today that all the victims were Chinese nationals. 8 women and 31 men died in the refrigerated container. Initially, police believed one of the victims may have been a teenager, but today we're being told they were all adults. The Chinese embassy in London has issued a statement saying, "We read with heavy hearts the reports about the deaths of 39 people in Essex, England. We are in close contact with the British police to seek clarification and confirmation of the relevant reports." More details of the container's journey are being revealed. It arrived in Belgium on Tuesday, then traveled to Purfleet, a smaller UK port, earlier Wednesday morning. That's where it was allegedly picked up by the truck and driver, a 25-year-old man from Northern Ireland who remains in custody. Properties linked to the suspect were searched this morning as officials look for potential links to organized crime. But people in the trucking industry here say human trafficking is a problem they deal with constantly and are worried it will just get worse.
Drivers are facing attacks. It's fair to say that the traffickers are upping their game in terms of how they're actually accessing and getting into vehicles and bringing migrants through. We're seeing changes there.
A vigil has been organized as a sign of solidarity with the victims and to raise concerns about the risks people will take to get to places like the UK. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
Residents have been ordered to abandon their homes in Northern California's Sonoma County as wildfires burn through 10,000 acres. 500,000 others have no power. Forced evacuations continue throughout the region north of San Francisco. Companies have had to shut off power to help contain the wildfire spread. The fire started in the mountains and expanded quickly. Emergency crews are warning of rapid rates of spread and the risk of potentially extreme fire behavior. Just last year, 88 people died in another massive wildfire.
Well, a concerning aquatic phenomenon off of BC's coast is now being seen further south. Voracious purple sea urchins are now chomping their way through towering underwater kelp forests in California all the way to Oregon. It's sending the delicate marine ecosystem off the shore into such disarray, other critical species are starving to death. For the past year, a project has been taking place in Haida Gwaii to start smashing the urchins. Their aim is to remove 75% of the sea urchins along one island. And Oregon, one reef has 350 million of them, a 10,000% increase since 2014. In Northern California, 90% of the giant bull kelp forests have been devoured by the urchins.
ExxonMobil is being grilled this week, both in New York State Court and in Washington, D.C.
It's facing accusations that it misled investors and the public on the business costs of climate change. As Kelly Crow tells us, many are asking, what did big oil know and when?
In this New York City courtroom, ExxonMobil is facing accusations that it didn't reveal to investors what it knew about the costs of climate change.
The problem is cost of carbon.
And that's just one in a series of emerging battles for the oil industry.
Oil companies like Exxon knew the scientific reality 40 years ago, but waged a war of deception that cost us precious time in the fight to save our planet.
In Washington, a congressional subcommittee examined what it called the industry's efforts to suppress climate science. Meanwhile, more than a dozen U.S. city and state governments have launched climate court action against the industry.
ExxonMobil told CBC News the New York court allegations are false and that baseless lawsuits do nothing to help advance needed solutions. Still, the questions are being asked. What did the oil companies know about the climate risk from fossil fuel emissions? When did they know? And what did they do with that information?
Our energy-consuming way of life may be causing climatic changes with adverse consequences for us all.
That film was produced by Shell in 1991 as part of an educational series and then forgotten. That's until Dutch environment reporter Jelmer Momers dug it up to show how much the industry knew about climate science.
It was very, very shocking, actually, to see how much knowledge was already there.
A Shell Canada spokesperson told CBC News in an email, Shell's position on climate change has been publicly documented for more than 2 decades. And in Canada, some municipalities are considering joining the legal fight against big oil.
The same motivations that have given rise to communities in the U.S. thinking that they have to go to court are going to more and more force Canadian municipalities to go, well, hang on, how can we pay these billions of dollars?
Already, Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria are seeking legal opinions. Kelly Crow, CBC News, Toronto.
Her photos aim to capture and empower women athletes of all ages. Coming up, meet a photographer whose subjects often overshadowed and ignored.
Well, when it comes to highlighting women in sports, the world still has a very long way to go. As you'll find out in our next story, the amount of programming devoted to females is dwarfed by the attention given to men.
But Vancouver photographers aiming to flip the narrative. In this special CBC presentation from CBC Arts, Alana Patterson goes in depth on why she's taken it upon herself to shine a strong light on female athletes.
Bag of rolls.
My name is Alana Patterson, and I am a photographer. There's a sticker that says works, and then I wrote questionable because I don't think it does. My project on women in sports has become sort of multi-tiered. It started with a single project on women's hockey. I was invited to shoot with an all-Indigenous girls basketball team by the sports coordinator at Squamish Nation. She was really just looking for a way to keep her team engaged. Having a photographer come down and sort of show them back to themselves as athletes would be a great way to do that. As I was shooting with them, there was such obvious benefits to the girls. Younger players would show up, and watching their confidence grow from the first couple practices to half a year in was astronomical. What we know is that girls react really positively to images of their mentors. So if you can show a girl on a regular basis images of a female athlete like her doing what she wants to do, she has an incredibly good reaction to that. Boys have the same reaction, but it's just taken for granted because they always have access to their heroes and mentors. It's everywhere. It has a benefit for anybody, but girls just don't receive that benefit enough. I chose to shoot with a direct flash on film because I wanted to mirror 80s and 90s sports imagery. I wanted people to think about classic sports imagery and how there was a direct lack of female representation. This was the first style of flash I used when I was shooting with the women's hockey, and I've busted so many. They're super old school, but they flash like really poppy, really strong. I like them, but I can't shoot with them anymore. It's too slow because they take a long time to reload and stuff, but this was the beginning. Shooting film brings a very different intention to a project. People read it differently. People think about it more historically, more seriously. They reference the past.
Fingers to me, not that way.
In the photography industry, we have this thing when you're shooting digital, it's called spray and pray. If you take enough photos, there's gonna be a good one, but you cannot do that on film. It's just not feasible. You have to be very intentional. You have to make your choices. Camera's getting wet today for sure. The latest project I've shot on women in sports is on Canada's swimming team. I always think it's really important to show portraits, which I love, and which people really connect with, but I always want to also show them actually doing their sport because that's what they work so hard towards. That is their thing, you know? So I always want to make sure I have action stuff, but it's always going to be difficult in a pool. You only have the one line, you can follow them. So I knew whatever athlete was in the one closest to the, the wall, that was going to be the one I got to work with the most. I'm so sorry. I really like the direction of the project. I'm really happy with it, but it definitely is sort of a beginning point, having just shot with them once. I think aesthetically it works really great. The water looks so awesome, and the girls, they're incredible athletes. Those are Olympic athletes. So, they're at the pool twice a day, 6 days a week. It's incredible, and it shows in their dedication, in their athleticism, in their relationship with the camera, in their confidence. They are the pinnacle of a female athlete. They blew my mind. Ready? Good. I asked to have the sort of, really impromptu quick portrait session after the practice because I wanted them to have gotten into that space where they've been engaged in their sport. They may be a little bit tired, but they have the presence of an athlete after they've worked really hard. Okay, thank you. That was beautiful. The portraits that I select are often confrontational. They're looking at the camera, and be like, hey, I'm here. I've been here this whole time playing my sport that I love, that nobody supports. And I've been here the whole time. And you're looking at me now, and I'm a little bit pissed. Those are the images that kind of speak to me and show their essence as female athletes. You know, sometimes I walk into a room and I'll see a person and I'll know immediately how they're gonna behave in front of a camera. And it's like, it's just sort of, it's almost an innocence. They stand in front of the camera and they just don't put a mask on. Like, it's just, this is it. This is all I have to show you. This is the deal. This is it. Because the camera creates a lot of walls for people. It's a very, very strong tool that people react to. It is a barrier for people, but there's just a certain type of person. They stand in front of the camera and they're just there. I see them standing there and I know that I have to take their photo if they'll let me, if they'll have me, you know. I don't think I've ever been wrong about that one.
That last shot is just beautiful with the snow falling in the background. And
Nice to put the spotlight on those athletes.
men's athletics get a lot of attention, so it's good.
There you go.
All right, well, I think we're leaving you some pictures of fall tonight.
Yes, it's fall out there. How can you tell? Because there's dogs walking through leaves, people enjoying the outdoors. And that's it for us. We'll see you again tomorrow, but Dan Burrett is here at 11 o'clock right after the National.
Have a good night.